The cold wind moved across the desert like a warning as the young woman stood near the broken trading post with two small children clinging to her coat, their faces pale and tired, and she knew the town had truly left them there to die, because the wagon tracks were already fading and the sun was sinking fast behind the red hills, turning the land dark and empty, and everyone in that town believed the same story, that no one survived once the night came and the Apache lands woke up. So the girl tried to stay strong, holding the children close, telling them soft lies about help coming soon, while her own heart beat hard with fear, because she had heard the stories too, stories of giant Apache warriors who rode like shadows and killed without mercy, and now every sound felt like death moving closer, the cry of a distant bird, the snap of dry wood under unseen feet, the deep silence that followed, and when the youngest child began to cry, she pressed his face into her shoulder, whispering, "Please, stay quiet," not because she was angry, but because she was afraid someone, or something, was listening, and as darkness spread across the land, she saw a shape on the far ridge, tall and still against the sky, so still she wondered if fear was playing tricks on her eyes, but then the shape moved, slow and heavy, and a horse appeared beneath it, large and powerful, stepping down the slope without sound, and her breath caught as the figure came closer, because this was no ordinary man. He was massive, broad-shouldered, with long dark hair that moved in the wind, his face half hidden by shadow, his presence filling the empty land like a storm, and the girl's legs felt weak as she pushed the children behind her, her hands shaking as she raised them slightly, not to fight, but to beg, because she knew she had no weapon, no strength, no place to run, and when the horse stopped only a few steps away, the warrior did not speak, did not shout, did not lift a weapon, he only looked at them, his dark eyes calm but deep, as if he had seen too much pain to be surprised by another, and the silence stretched so long it hurt, the children trembling, the girl's mouth dry, until finally she found her voice and it came out broken and desperate. "Please don't leave us here," she begged, the words falling into the cold air like a prayer, "please," and for a moment she was sure this was the end, because the story said Apaches showed no mercy, especially to those left behind, but instead of anger or cruelty, something unreadable passed across the warrior's face, a flicker of memory, of loss, of something buried deep, and he looked down at the children, their small hands gripping the girl's coat, their eyes wide with fear, and his jaw tightened, not with hate, but with resolve, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, slow, and steady, carrying a strange promise that cut through her terror. "I won't leave my family," he said, and the girl froze, confused by the word family, because she did not understand why this feared warrior would use such a word for strangers, and before she could ask, he dismounted, moving with quiet strength, and instead of reaching for a weapon, he pulled a thick blanket from his saddle and placed it gently around the children, the warmth shocking her more than any violence would have, and though fear still filled her chest, a small crack opened inside it, because nothing about this moment matched the stories she had been told, and as the warrior motioned toward his horse and then toward the dark valley beyond, she realized she was being given a choice she never expected, to follow him into the unknown or stay and face certain death, and with the cold growing sharper and the children shivering harder, she made her decision, stepping forward with shaking legs, not knowing that this single step into the darkness would change all their lives forever. The giant Apache warrior walked ahead of the horse as the night grew deeper, leading the way through narrow desert paths while the young woman followed behind, holding the children close, her heart still racing with fear and confusion, because she did not know where he was taking them or why he had chosen not to leave them to die, and every sound in the dark made her tense, the soft crunch of sand, the distant howl of a wolf, the wind brushing against dry grass, yet the warrior moved with calm purpose, as if the land itself trusted him. And when the younger child grew weak from fear and cold, the warrior stopped without a word, lifted the boy easily, and placed him on the horse, wrapping the blanket tighter around him, a small act that made the girl's eyes burn with quiet tears, because no one from the town had shown them such care, and as they continued, she studied the warrior from behind, noticing the scars on his arms, the way his shoulders carried both strength and weight, as if he had been alone for a long time, and though he rarely looked back, she felt that he was always aware of them, watching, guarding, and after a long ride they reached a hidden valley where small fires glowed like stars on the ground, revealing an Apache camp tucked safely between hills, and fear rushed back into her chest as figures rose from the shadows, men and women watching silently, their faces serious but not cruel, and the warrior spoke to them in his own language, his voice firm, and though she could not understand the words, she could feel their meaning, because the people stepped aside and allowed her and the children to pass. And inside the camp she was given water, warm food, and another blanket, all without chains or harsh hands, which confused her even more than fear, and as the children ate and slowly fell asleep by the fire, she sat awake, waiting for the moment when kindness would turn into danger, but it did not come, and instead she noticed the warrior sitting a short distance away, watching the fire, alone, his face lit by the flames, revealing tired eyes and a sadness that did not belong to a monster, and when she finally gathered the courage to speak, she asked him why he helped them, her voice low and careful, and he looked at her for a long moment before answering, telling her in simple words that he once had a family who were left behind in the same way, forgotten by people who believed they were better, and he would not allow that to happen again, and his words settled deep in her heart, because she understood then that he was not saving them out of kindness alone, but out of pain, and as the night passed, she realized that the danger she feared was not the Apache camp, but the world that had abandoned them, and when morning came, soft light filled the valley and she saw children playing, women cooking, and life moving peacefully, nothing like the savage stories she had been told, yet fear still lingered, because she knew the town would come looking for her, believing she had been taken by force, and as if sensing her thoughts, the warrior told her she was free to leave when she wished, but the land beyond was still cold and cruel, and for the first time since being abandoned, she felt the weight of choice in her hands, because leaving meant returning to people who had thrown her away, and staying meant trusting a man the world called her enemy, and as she watched the warrior help one of the camp children fix a broken toy, his large hands gentle and careful, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet understanding that safety was not always found where the law lived, and that sometimes the most feared shadows were hiding the strongest shelter, and though her future was still uncertain, she knew one truth clearly as the sun rose higher over the valley, her life had crossed into a path she could never walk back from. Days passed quietly in the hidden valley, and the young woman began to understand that life among the Apache people followed a rhythm very different from the fear-filled stories she had grown up hearing, because no one locked her away or treated her like a prisoner, and the children were allowed to move freely, laughing and playing near the fires, their faces slowly losing the tight look of fear they once carried, and each morning she woke to the sound of birds and soft voices instead of shouting and danger, yet inside her heart she remained careful, watching, learning, waiting for the moment when kindness might end, but that moment never came, and the giant warrior, though still quiet and distant, continued to show his care in small ways, bringing food without a word, making sure the children were warm at night, standing nearby whenever strangers entered the camp, not touching her, not demanding anything, only protecting, and this steady presence confused her more than anger ever could, because she had learned to fear cruelty, not patience, and as she helped the Apache women with simple tasks like gathering water and preparing food, she noticed how they watched her closely at first, but slowly their eyes softened, and one older woman offered her a small smile, a sign of acceptance that made her chest ache with emotion. And she realized that this camp was not built on fear, but on survival and trust, something she had rarely felt in the town, and each evening she saw the warrior sit alone at the edge of the camp, looking toward the distant hills as if waiting for ghosts that never came, and one night, as the children slept beside the fire, she gathered her courage and sat near him, not too close, but close enough to share the warmth. And though he did not look at her right away, he did not move away either. And in the quiet glow of the fire she asked him his name, and after a pause he spoke it, slow and calm, like a truth he rarely shared, and hearing it made him feel more real to her, less like a shadow and more like a man, and she told him her name in return, something she had not expected to give so easily, and for a moment they sat in silence, listening to the fire crackle, until he told her that he had lived many years without family, watching others fear him, fight him, or leave him behind. And that protecting her and the children felt familiar, like a duty his heart still remembered, and his honesty touched her deeply, because it held no promise, no demand, only truth, and as days turned into a week, she noticed how her fear slowly changed into something softer, a quiet respect, and sometimes when their eyes met, she felt a strange warmth she tried to ignore, because she knew how dangerous hope could be. And yet when the children ran to the warrior, laughing and calling out to him, and he lifted them with ease, smiling in a way he never did with others, she understood that they were no longer strangers sharing a fire, but a small family forming without words, and still, danger lingered beyond the hills, because the town would not accept this truth, and she knew that sooner or later, men with guns and anger would come looking for her, believing they were rescuing her from a monster, and this thought filled her nights with worry, but when she looked at the warrior, standing guard under the moonlight, silent and strong, she felt safer than she ever had in the town's walls, and though she did not yet call this place home, she knew her heart was slowly learning where it belonged. The peace of the hidden valley did not last forever, because fear has a way of traveling faster than truth, and in the town beyond the hills, whispers began to grow into loud voices, men saying the young woman had been taken by force, that a giant Apache warrior had stolen her and the children, and those stories fed old hate, so a group of armed men gathered, carrying rifles and anger, believing they were heroes riding to save what the land no longer belonged to, and while the camp went on with its daily life, unaware of the danger moving toward it, the warrior felt the change before anyone else, because he noticed the birds fly away and the wind shift as if warning him, and one evening as the sun fell low, a scout arrived with tense words, explaining that riders were coming, white men with weapons and hard faces, and fear spread quietly through the camp, not as panic, but as readiness, because they had faced this before, and when the young woman heard the news, her heart dropped, her hands shaking as she looked at the children, knowing the town would not listen to her truth, would not believe she stayed by choice, and she rushed to the warrior, her voice tight with fear, telling him the men would kill him if they found him, and that she would leave before that happened. But the warrior stood firm, his eyes steady, telling her that running would only prove the lies right, and that he would not hide like a criminal for protecting a family, and his words carried a quiet strength that both calmed and frightened her, because she knew what those men were capable of, and as night fell, small fires were dimmed and the camp grew silent, every sound sharp in the dark, and when distant gunshots echoed across the hills, the children woke crying, and the young woman held them close, whispering comfort while her own fear grew heavier, and soon torchlight appeared at the edge of the valley, moving closer like burning eyes, and voices shouted angry words, calling the Apache names filled with hate, and demanding the girl be returned, and the warrior stepped forward alone, standing between the camp and the danger, his tall frame clear in the firelight, not holding a weapon, but holding his ground. And when the town men saw him, they raised their rifles, their fear turning into rage at the sight of the man they believed was a monster, and before a shot could be fired, the young woman ran forward, her voice cutting through the noise as she shouted for them to stop, telling them she was not taken, that she was safe, that she chose to stay, but her words fell on deaf ears, drowned by years of lies, and one man yelled that she was afraid, that she had been brainwashed, and hearing this broke something inside her, because she realized then that the town never cared about her safety, only about their pride, and as tension tightened like a rope ready to snap, The warrior raised his hand, signaling his people to stay back, and spoke calmly to the town men, telling them they had abandoned the woman and children to die, and that he would not allow them to be harmed again, and his voice carried such certainty that even the angriest men hesitated, and in that moment, the young woman understood the true danger was not the Apache camp, but the world that refused to see beyond fear. And as the torches flickered and the wind carried the smell of smoke and dust, she stepped beside the warrior, standing with him instead of behind him, her choice clear to all, and though the night was filled with threat and uncertainty, a powerful truth stood unbroken under the dark sky, because family was no longer defined by blood or town borders, but by those who refused to leave each other behind. The night felt heavy and tight as if the valley itself was holding its breath, because the space between the armed town men and the Apache camp had become a fragile line that could break with one wrong move, and the young woman stood beside the giant warrior, her hands trembling but her feet firm, knowing that once a choice was made in front of witnesses, it could never be taken back, and the men from the town argued loudly, calling her confused, claiming the Apache had filled her head with lies, and each word pushed her further away from the place she once called home, because she remembered how easily those same people had left her and the children in the cold. And when one man stepped forward and raised his rifle, the warrior moved slightly, placing himself fully in front of her and the children, his broad back like a wall, and in that moment she saw clearly that he was ready to die for them without asking for anything in return, and this truth struck her harder than fear, and she called out to the town men, her voice breaking but strong, telling them she would not go back, that she had been given food, warmth, and safety here, when the town gave her nothing, and her words caused anger to ripple through the crowd, but also doubt, because some of the men remembered that night, remembered the wagon turning away, and as the silence grew uncomfortable, the warrior spoke again, telling the men that if they wished to fight, they would fight him alone, not the women or children, and that he would protect his family until his last breath, and the calm certainty in his voice made the danger feel suddenly real, because this was not a threat spoken in anger, but a promise spoken in truth, and the young woman felt tears fall as she realized she was no longer afraid of him, but afraid of losing him, and as the children held onto his legs, crying softly, the image broke through even the hardest hearts, and one older man lowered his rifle, his face filled with shame, admitting that they had been wrong to leave them behind, and though not all the men agreed, the power of that moment shifted the night, and slowly, one by one, weapons lowered, not because hate had vanished, but because courage had changed sides, and the town leader stepped forward, his voice uncertain, saying they would leave for now, but the land would remember this choice. And as the torches turned away and the riders slowly disappeared into the darkness, the young woman collapsed to her knees, the weight of fear finally releasing, and the warrior knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, offering comfort without words, and as dawn began to touch the sky with pale light, the camp breathed again, knowing danger had passed but change had arrived. And in that quiet morning, the young woman made her final choice in her heart, understanding that home was not a place she returned to, but a place that stood with her when the world turned its back, and she looked at the warrior, no longer as a shadow or a protector alone, but as the man who had become the center of her courage, and though the future was still unknown, she knew she would face it beside him, whatever it might bring. The morning after the riders left felt different, quieter but heavier, as if the valley was waiting to see what would happen next, and the young woman woke with the children close beside her, listening to the soft sounds of the camp coming back to life, yet her heart was still restless, because she knew the town would not forget what happened so easily, and neither would she, and as the sun rose higher, the warrior gathered the elders of the camp, speaking with them in calm, serious tones, explaining that truth had finally stepped into the open, and though danger still existed, hiding would only invite more lies, and later that day, something unexpected happened, because a small group of town people returned, not with guns and anger, but with cautious steps and uncertain faces, and among them was the older man who had lowered his rifle the night before, and he asked to speak, his voice carrying regret as he admitted that the woman and children had been abandoned because the town feared responsibility more than guilt, and hearing this spoken aloud made the truth heavier but also cleaner, because lies lose power when they are named, and the young woman listened silently, her hand steady now, as she realized she no longer needed their apology to survive, and the warrior stood beside her, not watching the town men, but watching her, ready to follow her lead, and when she finally spoke, she did not shout or accuse. She simply told them she was alive because someone they feared chose humanity over hate, and that the children were safe because the Apache camp had given them what the town refused to give, and her simple words carried more weight than anger ever could, and the town men lowered their eyes, understanding that rescue had never been needed, only truth, and as they left peacefully, a sense of closure settled over the valley, not perfect, but real, and in the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal, yet something had changed inside the young woman, because she no longer felt like a guest waiting to leave, and when she helped prepare food, teach the children, or care for the camp, she did so with quiet confidence, and the warrior noticed this change, noticing how her steps were lighter, her eyes stronger, and one evening as they walked near the river, he told her she was free to choose any path, including leaving if her heart wished, and she looked at him for a long moment before answering, telling him that freedom did not always mean walking away, and that she had already chosen, and though no promises were spoken, understanding passed between them like warm light, and from that day on, they stood closer, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals sharing a future shaped by choice, and the children, sensing this peace, laughed more freely, their laughter echoing across the valley like a promise that life could grow even from abandonment, and as the seasons began to shift, the camp accepted the young woman fully, not as an outsider, but as one of their own, and she understood then that love did not arrive loudly, but quietly, built from trust, protection, and shared truth, and though the world beyond the hills still held danger and judgment, the valley held something stronger, a family formed not by blood, but by the courage to stay, and as the warrior stood watching the sunset beside her, she knew the hardest part of her journey was over, and what lay ahead, though unknown, would no longer be faced alone. The days after the night of confrontation moved slowly, like the valley itself was healing from a deep cut, and the young woman felt a strange mix of relief and worry. Because although the guns had turned away, the truth was now exposed, and truth changes lives in ways fear never can, and each morning she watched the warrior train quietly near the hills, his movements strong but controlled, as if he carried the weight of many choices on his shoulders, and she knew he had stood between two worlds for her, risking his life and his people, and that knowledge made her heart heavy with gratitude, and soon word spread through the nearby lands that the girl had not been taken, that she had chosen to stay, and this truth reached the town in pieces, creating confusion and shame among those who once believed the lies, and one afternoon a small group arrived again, this time led by the town's preacher and an older woman who had once known the young woman's mother, and they came slowly, without weapons, their faces tired, and when they spoke, their voices carried regret, admitting that fear had guided their actions, not care, and as the young woman listened, she felt the final tie to her past loosen, because she no longer needed their approval or protection, and she spoke calmly, telling them that the Apache warrior had saved them when the town turned away, and that the children now slept without fear, and her simple words landed hard, because they were honest, and the visitors left quietly, understanding that what was broken could not always be repaired, and after that day, the valley felt lighter, and the young woman began to move through the camp with new purpose, helping teach the children letters and stories, sharing her knowledge while learning Apache ways in return, and the warrior watched her from a distance, noticing how she laughed more freely now, how she stood tall without fear, and one evening as the sun painted the sky orange and red, he finally spoke what had been growing between them, telling her that staying with him would not be an easy life, that others would judge her, and danger would always exist, and she listened without interrupting, then answered softly that safety without belonging was just another kind of loneliness, and she had lived enough of that already, and her words settled deep in his chest, because he had lived the same truth for many years, and from that moment, their bond shifted from protection to partnership, unspoken but clear, and the children felt it too, clinging less in fear and more in joy, running between them like threads tying a family together. And as weeks passed, the Apache elders welcomed her fully, offering her a place not as a guest, but as kin, and the young woman understood then that love did not always arrive with grand promises, but with steady presence, shared silence, and the choice to remain. And when she stood beside the warrior at the edge of the valley, watching the sun disappear behind the hills, she knew the world beyond still carried judgment and danger, but it no longer defined her future, because she had found something stronger than fear, something built on courage, truth, and the simple decision not to leave when staying mattered most. And as night settled peacefully over the land, the valley held a family that had once been strangers, now bound by choice, and the young woman knew, with quiet certainty, that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. Time passed gently in the hidden valley, marked by changing skies and growing children, and the young woman no longer counted the days since she had been left behind, because the past had loosened its hold on her heart, and life now moved forward with purpose and warmth. And the giant Apache warrior remained by her side, not as a shadow of fear, but as a steady presence, a man whose strength was matched by patience, and together they built a quiet life that did not need loud promises to feel real. And the children grew healthy and confident, running freely across the valley, laughing in ways that once felt impossible, and the camp accepted them fully, seeing in their story a reminder that family is chosen as much as it is born. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in gold, the warrior spoke before the elders, declaring that the woman and children were his family, not through force or command, but through care and responsibility. And his words carried deep respect, because in his world, family meant protection for life. And the woman stood beside him, her eyes filled with quiet emotion, understanding that this was not ownership, but belonging.